Well, welcome everybody. My name is Mark Paris. I'm the founder and executive director of the Charlotte Center. I'm here with my teammates, all of whom you will meet tonight. For those of you who are new to what we do, I wanted to share a few words at the top about who we are, what we're about, and what you can expect. So who are we, the Charlotte Center, and why now? So we say we are an organization in response to the times that we live in, and we are living in interesting times. We know our community and the nation is facing many issues. You know all of the headlines, and those headlines can be overwhelming, from threats to our democracy, to political polarization, to the destruction of our environment as we know it. We have war in Europe, viral pandemics, a growing food crisis in countless nations. We have record violence in America and soon more guns on the street, mass shootings, spiraling inflation, and maybe a recession looming. Here in Charlotte, we have rising rents, continued racial segregation, and deep social mobility concerns. So that's a long list, and I've probably left many other concerns out. On the other side of the ledger, we are building rockets to Mars, so that's a good thing. So we want to consider the times that we live in, but we also want to do something greater than ourselves with our time. Our mission is to help people and communities flourish. So how do we do that? We do it with up-close and personal conversation. We do it by considering the common good. And we do it with moral and civic imagination. We all want to thrive. We all want to live our best lives. We all want to live in a flourishing world. And we see flourishing, as Greek philosophers many years ago did as well, as sort of the ultimate aim of life, and also as an organizing principle for many other primary concerns, such as freedom and equity and justice and democracy. So why the humanities? Well, the humanities offer a particular powerful lens to explore what is meaningful and possible. The humanities are the things we care about, the very basic things we care about: our hopes, our dreams, our fears, our worries, and the questions we have about this, our crazy, beautiful, confounding lives. Questions such as, how do we speak to the moment that we are in? What is the highest version of ourselves? How do we cultivate becoming the people we want to be? And where do we find answers? Well, we find answers in stories, in what we believe, and in what we create. The humanities offer a basis for a different kind of conversation, one that seeks to understand who we are and who we can be. Do we limit ourselves to the humanities? No, we do not. We also look deeply, if less frequently, through the lens of the natural sciences and technology and business that also help us to explore invention, innovation, and novel ideas. Our theory of change is a simple one. The more connected we are, the more resilient we are. But we have to be connected in a certain way. As long as we bring sort of a critical and creative spirit to what is generally true, what is beautiful, what is good, then that resilience can really help us move forward. So we want to bring people and ideas together from across the community in that spirit, modeling thoughtfulness and productive civil discourse to build capacity for better problem solving and creating more optimum futures. So the forum is one part of our programming cycle that also includes community outreach, a Wisdom Wednesday and Civic Reflection series that we do, and an annual Festival of Ideas that we just held as part of Charlotte Chat. We think that our mission of helping people and communities thrive is urgent and timeless. And it's essential to the fullness of our hierarchy of needs, essential to being a community, to helping a community be what it can be. And we'd love for you to join us in that effort. So I want to thank our sponsors and donors who've taken a chance on us. There's no guarantee in the work that we do. We are an experiment, part of the larger experiment of this nation that we are a part of. And we're incredibly grateful for the support that we've received, knowing that there are no guarantees in this kind of work. So if you'd like to contribute to what we do, of course we would welcome that. And if you're part of an organization that may want to sponsor what we do, please let me know. We can share with you our logic model, what success looks like, and how we are going about measuring it. So if you would help me welcome Angela to the stage.
Oops. Good evening, everyone. So we start our event with a poem to help us get out of our head and into our heart, as poetry can do. Tonight's poem is by British-American poet W.H. Auden. As I walked out one evening. As I walked out one evening, walking down Bristol Street, the crowds upon the pavement were fields of harvest wheat. And down by the brimming river, I heard a lover sing, under an arch of the railway, love has no ending. I'll love you, dear, I'll love you till China and Africa meet, and the river jumps over the mountain, and the salmon sing in the street. I'll love you till the ocean is folded and hung up to dry, and the 7 stars go squawking like geese about the sky. The years shall run like rabbits, for in my arms I hold the flower of the ages and the first love of the world. But all the clocks in the city begin to whir and chime. Oh, let not time deceive you, you cannot conquer time. In the burrows of the nightmare where justice naked is, time watches from the shadow and coughs when you would kiss. In headaches and in worry, vaguely life leaks away, and time will have his fancy, tomorrow or today. Into many a green valley drifts the appalling snow. Time breaks the threaded dances and the diver's brilliant bow. Oh, plunge your hands in water, plunge them in up to the wrist. Stare, stare in the basin, and wonder what you've missed. The glacier knocks in the cupboard, the desert sighs in the bed, and the crack in the teacup opens, a lane to the land of the dead, where the beggars raffle the banknotes, and the giant is enchanting to Jack, and the lily-white boy is a roarer, and Jill goes down on her back. Oh, look in the mirror. Oh, look in your distress. Life remains a blessing, although you cannot bless. Oh, stand at the window as the tears scald and start. You shall love your crooked neighbor with your crooked heart. It was late in the evening. The lovers, they were gone. The clocks had ceased their chiming, and the deep river ran on. Now I'd like to invite my teammate Valeda Fullwood, and she will help direct the flow of this evening.
Thanks, Angela. All right, this is the still part of the Connect part of our 3-part evening, and following the poem, we open up space for you to connect and talk to each other. So we have 2 questions that I'd like you to consider and share in discussion. And so tonight's questions are, share a time when you made an assumption about something or someone. And then the other part, why do you think you made that assumption? And, what did you learn in the process? So let you chat, roughly 10 minutes. I'll give you a heads up when the countdown begins, and then we'll hear back from you later.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Rick Jones, and I wanted to share this story about assumptions. When I was in college, there was a tradition among the freshmen in college that they would build a bonfire, and the freshmen would run around the bonfire with no shirts on and stuff. So I'd leave my dorm, and I walk up to the bonfire. I'd never seen it. I'm from the Bronx, New York. I've never seen a bonfire before. So I walk toward the bonfire, and there are 800 to 1,000 white men yelling and screaming, running around the bonfire. So I got really scared. So I walk back to my dorm, I call home, and I call my little West Indian grandmother and tell her what happened. And she said, "Boy, take your behind right back up there." Now, the assumption was I was not welcome in that environment, and I had to get over that feeling of not being welcome, because now you're missing out on so many blessings when you just cut off a whole group of people based on an assumption. So that's my story. I got more, but I'll take it.
It's such an interesting question, because I think all of us have stories about how other people may have assumed things about us, but rarely do we talk about the assumptions that we've made ourselves, and then exploring why we did it. So I have the opportunity to introduce someone to you who will introduce someone to you. So let me see if I've got my notes with me. I hope I do. Here we go. So Missy Owen is a criminal defense attorney and founding partner in the firm Tim, Fulton, Walker, and Owen. Missy represents clients in state and federal courts across North Carolina, handling cases ranging from misdemeanors to homicides. Missy has a particular expertise in white-collar and sex offense cases, where she has represented clients in the pre-indictment phase, at trial, and on appeal. She has been recognized among top national trial lawyers and she is a criminal defense super lawyer. Missy is a graduate of Miami University and the Duquesne University School of Law. Help me welcome Missy to the stage.
Thank you so much for that nice introduction, for my introduction. It is so nice to be here, and I have to say this is my first time at one of these events, and I am so delighted to have been invited. What a wonderful organization this is, an opportunity, so I can't wait to come back for more. But what I want to talk to you about tonight is Sonya Pfeiffer, who is going to be speaking to you, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about her. If I had to tell you one thing about Sonya, she's a storyteller. She is the teller of people's stories. And before she became a criminal defense lawyer, she was a journalist. And she spent years telling stories about what was going on in our world to help us become more engaged with each other. And I think through that process, Sonya saw a grave amount of injustice that was happening to people. And that led her to go to law school, and it led her to become a criminal defense lawyer. Now, I'm going to tell you, when you become a criminal defense lawyer, your job is really to examine life. And you have to examine it from every angle. And you really get to know your client. And you have to understand why they were there, why this happened, what their reaction was to what had happened, how they responded. And in this, you're learning about this interconnectedness in all of us that we feel is extremely human, because through this process, our clients become our brothers and our sisters. that they become, the pain they feel is the same as the pain we feel. The love they feel is the love that we feel for our mothers, for our children. And this is the attachment that we develop as we learn how to tell the story of our clients. And Sonya, one of the finest criminal defense lawyers I know, was expert in this. We met again out at a professional meeting out in San Francisco, and she said, I have some news I need to tell you about. And I said, okay, what's the news? And she said, I'm buying a gallery. Well, my first reaction was, Sonya, that's wonderful. But what I was truly thinking was, sister, you are crazy. And I think she might have read that I was feeling the latter when I was saying the former. And she said, no, you have to understand this. I feel like we are constantly telling these stories to people who do not feel the human interconnectedness that they need to understand the story we are telling. And I believe through this art gallery, I can tell stories that will fight the injustices that we have been fighting. This is exhausting, tiring work. She is making change, and as I realize that we are all here because we want to make our societies better, I hold Sonya up as somebody who inspires me every day because I remember the work that is being done. It may look beautiful in the outcome, but it is painful and difficult and a sacrifice as it is being done. So I ask all of us as we hear her a takeaway from tonight that we can ask ourselves, can we feel uncomfortable? Can we be pushed to make this world better? It may be uncomfortable, it may be difficult. It is a sacrifice in all of our personal lives, but I hope you guys learn a little bit from Sonya as much as I'm lucky enough to learn every day. Thank you.
So I'm going to take this mic off. Yes? Okay, great. As Missy said, I do have a busy schedule, and that often translates into being somebody who moves a lot, and so I'm going to walk and talk this evening. Also, many of you in the remarks that you made in our discussion point took away many of the things I was going to talk about today. So I think that question was sort of the perfect prompt for where we're going. And then Missy took away my opening line, which is, I am a storyteller. So I have these careers that people think are varied. I was a reporter, a criminal defense and civil rights lawyer, I own an art gallery now. And those things seem so different, but the truth is the through line is the story, is telling stories. And stories are how we think. I believe that stories can change the world, that they are the most powerful way for us to connect with each other because we view the world through someone else's experience. And experiential learning is the most beneficial learning. So how did I become a storyteller? I've thought about this. Why is that what motivates me? Why has that driven me to do the things that I do? Like many of us, I think my strongest influences are my parents and my upbringing. My father was a local politician in Columbus, Ohio, who was obsessed with knowing the inner workings of Columbus, Ohio. That meant sometimes visiting things like the sewage plant and understanding how that worked. It meant going to black churches on Sundays for hours and understanding. That was a very different experience than my 45-minute Catholic drive-through Mass at 4 o'clock on Saturday. It meant going to the homes of new immigrants to Columbus, Ohio. It meant sharing meals with people who were refugees and brought into other families, and understanding that outside of the world that I knew, which of course, like almost every community in America, was a segregated community. Most everybody looked like me, thought like me, but I had the opportunity to understand there were people who were different than me in the place where I lived. Now, I didn't get all of the fundamental differences, but I knew that existed. And my mom was a teacher, and she loved literature, and she loved the arts, drama, theater. She still does. And she read to us every night. I have an older sister, a younger brother. I remember being piled in the bunk beds and listening to her read book after book. And my favorite book is Great Expectations. Has everybody here read Great Expectations? Okay, anyone not read Great Expectations? Okay, you need to read Great Expectations, and you should really have somebody read it to you. I recently read it to my 10-year-old daughter, and it's just as good, like 40 years later. So for those who have read it, when someone brings up that title, Great Expectations, I suspect in your mind you already see clocks stopped at the same time. You imagine Miss Havisham. You see haughty Estella, right? I don't know what your Pip looks like. I think everyone sort of has a different Pip, but it was through his lens that we viewed the world. And the lessons of that book really are love and loyalty and conscience are much more valuable than wealth or social status or class. And those were my big takeaways from that book. And those were things that were certainly communicated in my family and that drove me. But, you know, here's the thing. When we think about stories, what we need to recognize is we can fill in the blanks if the blanks aren't filled in for us, right? If there is something we don't understand, then we fill the blanks in with things that might not be true. The reason I think storytelling can be so powerful to address some of the biggest social issues we have, racism, classism, transphobia, is because you see it through that person's eyes. But if you don't have a narrative to help you understand that, you decide on your own. Like, how does this story end? So let's start with a riddle, which is like a little bit of a story. If you know this one, this is an old one, but a good one. If you know it, don't say the answer to your partner, okay? A father and son are driving a car and they have a horrible car accident. Ambulance shows up, brings them both to the ER. The father dies on the way to the ER. The son is brought into the emergency room. The surgeon comes in and looks down and says, "I can't operate, this is my son." Who's the surgeon? You were supposed to say that out loud. Did anybody wonder, or has everybody known that one now? Is that old news now? Just 5 years ago, a study was done with a group of people, mixed ages, mixed sexes. Only 15% of the people, 5 years ago, said his mother. Right? So what we do, and the reason that riddle has been so powerful, is because it helps people understand that we filled in a gap. I mean, in our society, women are just sort of relegated to this role of reproductive creatures and domesticity, and rarely do we think of them in positions of surgeon or attorney or that kind of thing. I think it's changing, and obviously if everybody here knew the answer, then yeah, good, we're on the right track. So I want to tell you another story now. And this one will give a little bit of background on context and how it is that we make certain assumptions. So a number of things that people talked about. We talked about fear. We talked about how we made assumptions based on the way people looked. There's me. An experiment I want to talk to you about. Now listen, this is really as gory as it's going to get. I had some slides in here that I recognized I needed to take out because this was not a bunch of criminal defense lawyers. I thought this one would be okay. Okay, so there was an experiment done with forensic archaeologists. And each of them was given the same assignment. They had to dig up a skeleton. There was a control group and there was a test group. The control group dug up the skeleton, and it was either unclothed or it had gender-neutral clothing. No way of telling what the gender was. The test group dug up a skeleton, and it had clearly female clothing. You could not question whether it was male or female, although I don't know, honestly, you probably could now. But at the time, you couldn't. It was the same skeleton for both groups, and the skeleton was a male. When the test group, who dug up the skeleton in female clothing, was asked to assess something about that skeleton, they came up with answers completely inconsistent with the fact that this was a male skeleton, such as, the only thing I know for sure about this skeleton, just given the age, is that she definitely had multiple children. So this was about context, having context in advance. The test group dug up a skeleton with a dress, and these are forensic archaeologists who we would like to believe are thinking very scientifically, right? They're not letting those types of things influence what they do in terms of their outcomes. But they, on their own, took that dress, and it sort of filtered into their conscience about what they made in terms of conclusions, right? So why am I telling you about context? Because we all have context in our lives that we might not even be aware of. How we grew up, who we were exposed to, the stories that we were told, who told those stories, whose stories weren't told because they weren't given the opportunity. We talk about dominant narratives, right? We have context that we are unaware of as we walk through the world. So, as a storyteller, oh, no, sorry. I knew I should have clicked that. When we talk about context, a lot of what I talk about when I talk with lawyers is cognitive bias. Anyone familiar with that term, cognitive bias? So confirmation bias is one of those within it. And this is basically what those forensic archaeologists did. They made an assumption based on the fact that there was a dress on the skeleton, that it was a woman, and they therefore confirm what they already knew. So I love this cartoon. The little guy over here on the left says, "Did you read my paper on confirmation bias?" Yes, but it only proved that what I already knew. And this is an illustration that I think is really important when it comes to confirmation bias. So this Venn diagram on the left-hand side is all of the facts and evidence that exist around a certain idea, a certain situation. On the right, you have our beliefs, things that we think we already know. And this little sliver in the middle, that is the evidence that we believe. So if you think about this on a daily basis when you are provided new information, you're taking in a lot of info and discarding a lot of it if it doesn't fit with what you already believe. And so that is called confirmation bias. And you think about how much information we are assaulted with on a daily basis. And we need these mental shortcuts. We need these biases to help us organize information. But they can prove wrong, and they can prove dangerous, and they can prove to further narratives that we're trying to break down. Okay, so now let's get to career number one. Here I am as a reporter. The truth is, I actually wanted to be an actress, but my mom made assumptions about New York and about Los Angeles, and I was not allowed to pursue that dream. So my father suggested this as an alternative to me. The other alternative was professional soccer, but at the time, I mean, I know Title IX's all like, we're at the 50th anniversary, but at the time, opportunities were few and far between for young women. So as a reporter, you know, Missy talked about this, and truly it's like you sort of read my notes or read my mind, but one of the greatest things about being a reporter is that you are constantly challenged. Your assumptions are constantly challenged. You are meeting people whose circumstances might be different than yours, and what you think is frequently flipped. So when I first came to North Carolina in 2000, one of the first stories I covered was the death of Dale Earnhardt. Now, I'm from Ohio. I had lived in New York, I had lived in Atlanta, I had lived in Paris, I had lived in Omaha, Nebraska. I did not know much about NASCAR. I did know Dale Earnhardt, and I did know that this was a big idea. And I certainly had in my mind a lot of assumptions about NASCAR fans. So I was given the assignment to go up to Concord and interview people at this race, and I remember thinking to myself, I don't know what I'm going to get out of them. Are these people that are ever emotional? Like all sorts of thoughts about what it would be. And I found this guy who I remember saying to my photographer, right there, 1 o'clock, he's our man. He was everything I thought about a NASCAR fan. Big, burly, like ruddy face. He had a mustache and beard. His hair was sticking out from his number 3 cap. He had on his suede and leather jacket, Dale Earnhardt emblazoned on the back of number 3. So we start the interview, and we're going through a lot of the basics that I expected about why he was a fan, about NASCAR, about what he witnessed when Dale died. And I'm thinking to myself, wow, he seems to be getting emotional now. Because as you talked about what he witnessed, I was like, oh my gosh, like this guy's really upset about it. And then I said, okay, well, how do you explain this to yourself? How do you make sense of Dale passing in this way? He stopped. He looked over at the woman next to him. He said, ma'am, I just tell myself God needed a driver. And he started bawling. And part of me was like, oh my God. Like, I thought this guy was 100% like God, guns, and country, and he just proved it. But at the same time, I was seeing this humanity in someone who I did not think could be so upset. And I thought, oh my gosh. I judged this guy, obviously, but I just got the greatest soundbite. And it ended up running not only on my local station, but all the networks, all the ABC networks took it because it was so good. And he personified that. But what I also found in being a reporter is that sometimes we expect ourselves to get it. We expect that we won't make assumptions. And one of the times that was really challenged was Hurricane Katrina. So in 2005, when Hurricane Katrina devastated New Orleans, I was actually already in law school. I was going to law school during the week at Chapel Hill. I was flying back up to Boston on the weekends to report and anchor, and fly back. And so when Katrina happened, I was witnessing the coverage, not only as someone whose colleagues were there on the ground and covering it, and I was seeing the stories and also trying to find local stories in Boston, but also, at the time, as a student in a social justice lawyering class. John O. Calmore was my teacher, someone who actually made a very big difference in my life. And we talked about these two pictures. Can everyone see these photographs? On the left, there's a young black man. He's got soda and he's got a bag. On the right, two young white people, a boy and a girl. They've also got some bags, backpack, all right? So, is anyone familiar with this dichotomy? Have you seen this before? Okay, they were taken on the same day around the same time period. They both ran in an Associated Press story. And here's how each one was described. A young man walks through chest-deep flood water after looting a grocery store. But what about the white kids? Two residents wade through chest-deep water after finding bread and soda from a local grocery store. Okay? This is where context matters. This is where what we have been told comes out in ways that we might not even intend. But what happens with stories like this is we're perpetuating this dominant narrative. This narrative written by people who have power, who have privilege, who don't look like this young man on top. And this was a particularly jarring moment for me, especially as someone who felt like I got it. I'm in a social justice lawyering class. And this is when I realized that telling these stories, it needs to be done in the courtroom. We need to be talking about the law. We need to be talking about the rules, because the people who made the law, the people who made the rules, they need to be challenged with whatever their assumptions might be. And so that led to career number 2. And I do ask that you note that I have brown hair, my natural brown hair here, not the blonde hair that I had to have when I was a reporter, just FYI. And yes, that is totally staged with me and my husband on the other side, and I just love that. So being a criminal defense lawyer, I mean, Missy did such a beautiful job of talking about what we do. But a lot of my civil rights work began to trouble me in terms of how assumptions were made in those cases and really breaking apart what happens to people and how that happens. So one of the cases I want to talk to you about is Tim Bridges. Now, I put a very happy picture of Tim here because I'm going to uplift you tonight, and we're not going to talk about all that terrible stuff you were talking about earlier, Mark. I mean, at our table, we were wondering when that was going to end. Okay, so let me tell you the story of Tim Bridges. May 1989, Mother's Day. A woman named Modine Wise is found in her apartment by her sister, Virginia. She lived alone in Noda. She was wheelchair bound. She had been raped and brutally beaten and left for dead. The police show up when the sister calls and they collect some evidence. There's some hairs, the washcloth, menthol cigarettes, and on the wall there is a bloody palm print. And so they collect all of this, and the head detective says, this is what we're going to do first. We're going to canvass Noda, and we're going to round up, let's call them the usual suspects. The person who did this was witnessed by a neighbor, described as a young white male, blonde hair, and she said, that's what we're looking for, skinny, blonde hair, white male, with a criminal record. So already, we're looking for people who have had a run-in with the law. So we've already sort of narrowed the focus. And they round up about 12, 13 people, including my client, Tim Bridges. Tim had a drug problem. He bought and sold drugs. He sometimes turned tricks for drugs. And he was one of the people who was rounded up and taken to the Charlotte Police Department. It was the Charlotte Police Department at the time, not CMPD. And they all had their palm print taken. And they compared the palm print to the bloody palm print on the wall. Tim was excluded. Everyone was excluded. Mid-June, they still don't have a suspect. And often what you find in these cases are the worst cases are the ones where the misconduct is greatest because you don't have a lot of evidence, but you have a public that's outraged, you have a public that's scared, you have police that are pressured, you have prosecutors who are pressured. And so they put out newspaper articles and they do a Crime Stoppers ad. And then they hit the streets again. And this time, they talked to a young man named Matt Donaldson, who was also one of the early ones who was rounded up, whose palm print was compared but excluded. And in this conversation with Matt Donaldson, he says, well, I heard that Tim Bridges did it. You say, okay, well, tell us more about that. And that was pretty much all he could say. Didn't remember the conversation too much. You know, they had been drinking or they had been high. About the same time, because there was so much publicity about this crime, CPD gets a call from Gaston County, from someone who's working at the jail. And they say, you know, we saw your article in the paper, and there's a guy here who we have in custody for rape. He's done 3 old ladies in the past. He smokes menthols. I think he matches the description. He was painting houses up in Charlotte in May. Detective says, okay, I'll come check it out. So the detective comes down with a photograph of the palm print and shows it to the Gaston County deputy, looks at it, and it's a blown up photograph, by the way. It's not like, you know, the same size as a hand. And he says, nah, that's too big, man, that's too big, not him. And the CPD officer leaves. The guy's in the Gaston County jail. He doesn't interview him. He doesn't do a swab. He doesn't get a blood sample. He doesn't get a palm print. He leaves. Okay? Now it's mid-August. There's still no arrests. And they go back out to the streets. And they start talking to some of the same people they talked with. And they go back to Matt Donaldson. And now he says, no, that's not true. I didn't hear him say that. And now that he has changed his story, they actually really believe his story because he wouldn't flip-flop if it wasn't true. And so now they go to other people and they get 3 people to say, I heard Tim Bridges did this. And then the detective goes to the prosecutor and says, hey, I have these 3 statements from these 3 people. All of them are people who we would love to cross-examine. I mean, the credibility shot. And the DA looks at it and says, this is not enough. This is not enough. We don't have physical evidence. You know, we don't have an actual admission. You got to do more. So they go back to Matt Donaldson, and now they're doing things like arresting for loitering, arresting for minor drug possession. Well, I'll drop that if you tell me what you know about Tim. So now Matt Donaldson says, okay, I actually heard Tim say he did it. And now they go to the DA, and the DA says, okay, you can arrest him. But we do need more. You got to stay on this because we still have a problem, like, right, your palm print, and there's no physical evidence. And so they keep beating the streets. They don't get much more. They arrest Tim. Tim offers to take a lie detector test. He lets them take his DNA. They submit him for another palm print analysis. He's excluded again. And at the same time, there's a note that the guy in Gaston County has been bragging in the jail about doing the Modine Wise rape. This note is in the detective's file that someone called from Gaston County and said that. Not followed up on at all. Now they got their guy in jail. And so they are getting close to trial. They haven't matched the palm print. They decide we really need to do something about it. This is problematic. So they get the name of every first responder who showed up on the scene, and they do a palm print analysis of each first responder. They're all excluded. So remember, Modine Wise's sister is the one who found her. By this point in time, it's been almost a year. Sister has passed away. She's been buried. They recognized not having a match of this bloody palm print was such a bad fact for them that they exhumed the body of the sister and did an analysis of her palm print to the bloody palm print. Didn't match. What are you gonna do? Well, what they did was brought in their hair analyst and said, listen, we gotta test these hairs. And they sat down together with the forensic hair analyst, with the cop, with the DA. This is our guy. We have these hairs. Can you see if you can do a match? Doesn't this sound like the archaeological experiment, right? So what do you think happened? What did the hair analyst come back with? Anyone? And Sue said, I'm not going to ask you. I know you know. It was a match. Now, you can't say it's a match. It's not a match. You can say there are similarities. You can pretty much exclude somebody when you do this hair analysis, but you can't say it's a match. That exceeds the bounds of science, all right? But now they have it. They still have this pesky problem about the palm, and they know the defense is going to make hay with it. So now the team comes together again. They have, how much time do we have? You're giving me the symbol? What do we got, 5 minutes? 5 minutes, okay. This is a good one, I'll get to it. And when they come together with the palm print analyst, they explain the problem. And she writes her final report. And what she says in her final report is, while I do not find that this palm print matches Tim Bridges, I can't exclude him as a contributor. Okay? This is what we call noble cause corruption, or ends justify the means. And so, now I realize we've got to get out of this world to tell these stories to other people because I'm banging my head against a brick wall. And so, yes, I decide to buy an art gallery, number 3, because this is where stories really matter, right? This is where we can change people's view. We can create a new narrative. We can explain things in a way that words can't, that sometimes stories can't. And so this is Milan Din, who you mentioned. Thank you very much. And this is one of her pieces that I just want to talk a little bit about. When you see this, anyone have thoughts on what this work is about? If you already know this work, I don't want you to raise your hand, but what do you think when you see a flag made by an artist? What was that? Bullets. Okay. Sadness. Mm-hmm. Fragment. Mm-hmm. Crying. Okay. So a lot of people see those things. They think this is protest art, but here's the truth. This piece honors the United States of America because Milan is from Vietnam. And her family was on the last ship to leave Vietnam before Saigon fell. And as their ship went out to sea, it started to sink. And there was a U.S. Navy ship, the USS Kirk, that saw that ship sinking and saw thousands of people on it. And they were scrambling onto small little boats. And those little boats weren't going to be able to go anywhere. They had no flag. They had no country. And the USS Kirk called back to D.C. explaining the situation. Now, at the time, you've got a big fear of communism. And you've got all of these Vietnamese people who might be communists, and D.C. doesn't respond. And so the captain of the USS Kirk made the decision to bring all of them on board or to tie the refugee boats to the U.S. ship with the flag, the United States of America flag, and bring them all to safety. This is called One Nation for All. Quickly, we'll talk about this because many of you might know it, Off the Plantation. So this is a two-part exhibition we did, entirely experiential, done by black artists, although you'll see there is one white guy. He's like the John Brown, okay? And he is from Canada. And so this exhibition was all about what it means to be a black artist, what it feels like to be a black artist. And this is how I know that stories can make a difference. This is how I know that artists can create something that challenge what we believe. Because after this exhibition, we had people write on little Post-it notes what their experience was as they left. And many of the black people wrote messages like, I felt this, I loved this, thank you for telling my story. And here's what many of the white people wrote. These are the sticky notes as they left, because it's totally anonymous, right? Thank you for the discomfort. Strong, not about comfort zones, no respect, rightfully so. Just strong. I liked where my head was as I was leaving. And this was someone who was really challenged by a performance piece that made the white audience really uncomfortable because these artists were sharing experiences of feeling excluded, of feeling tuned out, of feeling discounted. And for the white people to have that same experience in a space where they often feel quite comfortable, a gallery, it was impactful. And so telling that story through the lens of these artists made a real difference for them. Okay, I'm wrapping up. I'm almost on time. Yeah. Okay, so when we talk about race in particular, here's my philosophy about race and dealing with race. If you're honest about it, it's a social construct, right? I mean, we have biological differences, genetic differences that go back to the beginning of time. It's how we decide to use those genetic differences in categorizing people, labeling people, seeing each other. Well, I believe anything that can be constructed can be deconstructed. And I do think this is the way to do it. So I will leave you with a quote from Great Expectations. Pause, you who read this, and think for a moment of the long chain of iron or gold, of thorns or flowers, that would never have bound you but for the formation of the first link on one memorable day. Thank you all for being here.